My daughter's fiancé asked about the timber rights on our property 4 times in 3 visits. The first time, I thought nothing of it. The second time, I set my coffee cup down. The third, I started paying very close attention. And the fourth time, standing right there in my kitchen, his hand resting on the windowsill, his eyes fixed on the old-growth tree line at the edge of our back acreage. I knew I was looking at something I didn't yet have a name for. The night before Hannah's wedding, she pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm as she hugged me goodnight. 6 words on the back of a gas station receipt written fast, in her handwriting. "Mom, I know. Please stop this." I had known for 6 weeks. What she didn't know was that I'd spent every one of those weeks building a case. I'll start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. I'm 63 years old. I live on 160 acres of East Tennessee hill country, and I spent 31 years as a paralegal for a family law firm before I retired to care for my husband, Howard, when his health started to slip. Howard passed 3 years ago, a stroke, sudden, while he was walking the fence line on a Tuesday morning in October. The paramedics told me he was probably gone before he hit the ground. I try to find comfort in that. Most days it works. Howard had built a modest sawmill supply business from nothing across 40 years. We lived like people who counted their pennies. Same truck for 12 years, church potlucks on Sundays, a kitchen garden every spring, no vacations to speak of. What the neighbors never knew was that Howard had sold the company 2 years before he died, held onto his patents, and left behind an estate that would have surprised anyone looking at our rusted mailbox. The property alone, the 160 acres, the farmhouse, the old barn, Howard rebuilt board by board in 2004, was worth considerably more than we'd ever let on. Howard believed strongly in flying and sailing under the radar. "Money changes people," he used to say, "the moment they know you have it," so we didn't let on. Hannah was the only one who might have suspected otherwise, and even she didn't know the full picture. She'd grown up watching me clip coupons. She became a physical therapist in Asheville, built her own life, paid her own rent. I was proud of her for exactly that. Cole Drummond arrived in our lives the way trouble usually does, dressed well and smiling with his whole face. Hannah called me in February, breathless, the way she used to sound as a little girl when something wonderful had happened. "Mom, I want you to meet someone. His name is Cole. I think you're going to love him." She hadn't dated seriously in 2 years, since a man she'd trusted turned out to be someone else entirely. I'd watched her heal from that. I was careful not to let my relief show too much when she called. Cole came to the house for the first time in March. He was 35, dark-haired, the kind of handsome that seemed deliberate. Financial consultant based in Nashville. He shook my hand with both of his and asked which name I preferred he use. Good manners, I thought. And in the same breath, practiced, I thought. We had dinner. He was easy to talk to. He asked thoughtful questions about my years as a paralegal, teased Hannah, in a way that made her laugh without making her feel small, helped clear the table without being asked. And at the end of the evening, standing on my porch with the sun going down behind the ridge, he looked out across the back acreage and said, almost to himself, "How much land comes with all this?" Curiosity, I told myself. City people ask that. He proposed in April, 4 weeks later. Hannah called me at 10 in the evening, crying in the happy way. They'd been together 5 months. Something moved in my chest that I didn't immediately recognize as alarm. By May, he had asked about the timber rights. By June, about whether the county survey was recent. By late June, I watched him pause outside my study door while he thought I was in the kitchen, his eyes tracking across the deed map I had framed on the wall. The 4th time, standing in that same kitchen, he asked directly, "Do you have mineral rights or just surface?" I gave him a neutral answer. Then I went back inside and called Joan. Joan has been my attorney for 22 years. She handled Howard's estate, set up the trusts protecting Hannah's inheritance, and is the kind of woman who says what she means on the first try. I explained Cole. The timeline, the engagement in month 4, the questions about land, the way his eyes inventoried every room he walked through. How fast did you say they got engaged? 5 months together, proposed in month 4. A pause on the line, that's fast. I know. Give me a few days, she said. Don't sign anything he puts in front of you. Don't tell Hannah you called me. 3 days later, Joan called back. Her voice had the careful flatness she uses when the news is bad. He's done this before, twice that I can confirm. The room went very still. A woman in Asheville, 2021, daughter of a retired bank executive. Cole dated her 4 months, got engaged in the 5th, attended one family estate planning meeting, left 3 weeks later with no explanation. The family paid $80,000 to make him go away and signed an NDA rather than face the publicity. I sat down. A woman in Chattanooga, 2022, father with early-stage dementia, significant real property. Same pattern. Engagement in month 4. Cole started asking questions about power of attorney, what it takes to establish it, whether a primary care physician could certify incapacity. Gone 2 months later, $120,000 to disappear. He targeted women whose fathers were gone or unable to protect them, I said slowly. Yes, Joan's voice was quiet. Howard has been gone 3 years. You're the one holding everything now. I thought of Hannah's voice in February, breathless, trusting, full of something she'd been afraid to feel again. Joan gave me the name of an investigator she trusted. Earl Pickett, retired Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, 15 years in the field. He's quiet and he's thorough, she said. He finds things people believe are buried. Earl came to the house on a Tuesday, driving a truck so ordinary, I had forgotten the color before he'd reached the porch steps. He sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and listened without interrupting while I told him everything. Then he said, "Give me a week." He didn't need a week, he needed 4 days. Cole Drummond's real name was Boyd Yarrow. There was an active warrant out of Harlan County, Kentucky, for wire fraud, a land scheme targeting 2 elderly couples in 2019. He had filed a legal name change in Tennessee in 2020, the day before the Kentucky warrant was formally issued. The warrant followed the name he'd left behind. The new name walked free. Earl told me to sit down before he continued. Boyd Yarrow's father was Herman Yarrow. Herman had owned a sawmill operation in Harlan County for 2 decades, a small, family-run business that had supplied lumber to contractors across southeastern Kentucky. In 2006, Herman had applied to expand the operation. New equipment, doubled capacity, access to a county contract worth real money. Howard had been on the County Commission's Environmental Advisory Board that year. He'd submitted written testimony opposing the expansion. The sawmill's runoff was affecting a tributary creek that fed the local water table. The permit was denied. Herman Yarrow lost the major contract, lost 2 others that followed from it. By 2008, when the economy collapsed, there was nothing left to hold the business together. The sawmill closed. Herman died of a heart attack in 2010. Boyd was 22 years old. I sat with that for a long time. Howard hadn't destroyed Herman Yarrow's business. He'd told the truth about water quality to a county advisory board, the way a man with any conscience would. But a 22-year-old who watched his father's life fall apart had apparently decided the story was simpler than that. Grief doesn't care much for nuance, especially in a young man with nowhere to put his anger. He doesn't just want the money, Earl said, laying the file on my table. He wants to ruin what Howard built. Your land, your legacy, your daughter. That's the target. I looked at the photograph Earl had found. A younger Boyd Yarrow, Cole's face but harder, photographed at a county fair in 2008, beside a man I recognized from the property records as his father. Howard would never have known them by sight. He'd submitted testimony about creek runoff, not about a family. Tragedy making more tragedy. Like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples going on long after anyone meant for them to. The next phone call I received was from my doctor. I've been her patient for 9 years. She doesn't call after hours unless something is wrong. She called on a Thursday evening and said, "I need to tell you something. I think you may be in danger, and I'm calling because I took an oath and because I'm not willing to stay quiet about this." Cole had come to her office 6 weeks earlier. He'd identified himself as Hannah's fiancé and said he was worried about me, that I'd been repeating myself, seeming confused, forgetting things I should have remembered. He asked what the earliest signs of cognitive decline looked like in women my age. He asked what medications could affect judgment and decision-making in the elderly. And then, and here is where my doctor's voice went flat and controlled, he asked about lorazepam, the dosage, how quickly it dissolved in warm liquids, how long it remained detectable in a person's system. "I've been your physician for 9 years, she said. You have no cognitive decline. You have no memory problems. You manage a complex estate. You raised that woman, and you worked 31 years in legal practice on your own judgment." Her voice tightened. He wasn't asking as a concerned future son-in-law. He was researching. "Think carefully," she told me, "about every time he had been in my kitchen, every glass he'd poured, every cup of coffee he'd offered to freshen, everything he'd handed me." I thought about the sweet tea he'd refilled for me last visit while I was in the hallway answering the phone. I had poured most of it out later because it tasted off. I'd blamed the pitcher sitting in the afternoon sun too long. We built the trap together, Joan, Earl, my doctor, and the county sheriff, a man named Patterson, serious and unhurried, who my doctor had worked with before on financial elder abuse cases. We did not move to arrest Cole immediately. I insisted on this. If we arrested him quietly, Hannah would always wonder. She'd carry the question the rest of her life. Whether I'd been wrong, whether I'd taken something from her that was real. I knew my daughter. She would grieve for the person she'd believed Cole to be, and grief has a way of rehabilitating the person who caused it. I needed her to see it clearly, in front of witnesses, with no version of events left that could be argued away later. 2 weeks before the wedding, I invited Cole to dinner. Just the two of us. I told him I wanted to get to know my future son-in-law better, that with all the planning we hadn't had real time to sit down. He agreed without hesitating. Too quickly. The cameras Earl had installed were invisible, behind a mason jar on the top shelf, tucked inside the smoke detector by the back door, set into the bookshelf between 2 of Howard's old lumber trade catalogs. Earl assured me the audio would hold up in court. I made supper. We ate. I asked about his childhood, his work, his plans for after the wedding. He answered everything smoothly and met my eyes the way someone does when they've practiced meeting eyes. At 7:30, I pressed 2 fingers to my temple and said I had a terrible headache coming on. "Wedding stress," I told him. I excused myself to lie down, asked him to please finish eating, and left a glass of sweet tea on the kitchen counter where he could see it plainly. I climbed the stairs, counted to 30, opened the tablet Earl had left on the upstairs landing, and watched the kitchen feed. Cole sat at the table for 11 seconds after I left the room. Then he stood, walked to the base of the stairs, and listened for my footsteps. Satisfied, he moved to the kitchen counter. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a small prescription bottle, opened it, shook a tablet into his palm, found a spoon in the second drawer, pressed the back of the spoon against the tablet until it crumbled into powder, tipped the powder into my sweet tea, stirred it, tapped the spoon against the rim, wiped it with a paper towel, tucked the bottle back into his jacket, rinsed the spoon under the tap, returned to the table, and sat down. 43 seconds from start to finish. He was finishing his supper, relaxed, when I came back downstairs. "Feeling any better?" he asked. "A little," I said. I reached for the glass. He watched me with a warmth in his eyes that was the most frightening thing I had encountered in 63 years. My phone rang, planned, timed, Joan on signal. I turned my back to him. I wrapped the glass carefully in the dish towel I'd left folded on the counter, the way Earl had shown me, preserving every fingerprint on the smooth surface, and poured the tea down the sink. Set the wrapped glass in the basin. When I turned back, something moved behind Cole's expression, there and gone in less than a second. Then his smile came back. "I should let you rest," he said. "Big day coming." He meant the wedding. He meant something else entirely. The lab confirmed lorazepam in the residue on the glass. My doctor's voice, when she called with the results, was tight with something she didn't name, but I recognized. She said the amount found was enough to make a woman my age fall, become disoriented, lose whole hours she couldn't account for. Enough, documented over time on video and in medical records, to build a case for incapacity, for guardianship. For someone to petition for power of attorney over everything, Howard had spent 40 years building quietly and airfully so that his family would be safe after he was gone. We had the video. We had the lab results. We had the Kentucky warrant. We had statements from the 2 prior families who had agreed, now that hard evidence existed, to come forward. We had Cole's visit to my doctor's office, documented and signed. We had a sheriff. I chose the wedding. The night before, Hannah came to my bedroom doorway. She was in her pajamas, hair loose the way she'd worn it as a girl. She stood there for a moment, visibly trying to find a way to begin. Then she crossed the room and held on longer than usual when she hugged me. When she pulled back, she pressed a small folded paper into my hand. I opened it. 6 words in her handwriting, on the back of a gas station receipt. "Mom, I know. Please stop this." She had gone back to the rehearsal dinner venue that afternoon to retrieve an earring she'd left in the bridal suite. Walking past the supply room behind the catering kitchen, she'd heard voices. Cole and his brother Rhett, who had flown in 2 days earlier, and whom I'd recognized immediately as another arm of the operation. She had stood in that hallway and listened to her future husband say, "Once the paperwork clears, the old woman won't know what she signed. We'll have the deed transferred in 6 weeks, maybe less." She'd stood in that hallway for 2 full minutes before she could make herself walk away. She had spent the rest of the afternoon alone in her car, in a church parking lot deciding what to do. She'd come to me instead of running because she was Howard's daughter. She held her ground even when it cost her something. I sat her down on the edge of my bed and told her everything. The warrant, the 2 women before her, the doctor visit, the 43 seconds I'd watched on a tablet while he ruined my sweet tea. She went very still as I talked, the way water goes still before it freezes over. When I finished, she said, "How long have you known?" 6 weeks. "You were carrying all of that alone." "You were carrying it alone tonight," I told her. "We were doing it at the same time, without knowing." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands in her lap. Then she looked up. "I want to be the one to tell them." At the wedding. In front of everyone. Her jaw was set. He doesn't get to leave quietly. He doesn't get to go do this to someone else's family. The next morning came in clear and warm, the kind of September day East Tennessee, saves for occasions it wants people to remember. The chairs were arranged in the meadow behind the old barn, 110 guests, wildflowers from my kitchen garden. A string quartet Hannah had heard at a friend's wedding 2 years ago and tracked down. It was genuinely beautiful, all of it built on a lie that was about to end. Hannah took my arm at the edge of the meadow. Her bouquet trembled slightly. She looked at me through her veil, and I could see past it to her face, clear, set, ready. The way her father used to look before something hard that needed doing. "Ready?" I whispered. "Ready," she said. We walked. Cole stood at the front in a charcoal suit. His brother Rhett was beside him. Best man, the other half of a plan 14 years in the making. Both of them looked like men who believed this was going to work out exactly as they'd arranged it. The officiant moved through the opening words. I sat in the front row, with my hands folded in my lap, and waited. If anyone here knows of any lawful reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." I stood up. Hannah stood up beside me at the exact same moment, without looking at me. The meadow went so quiet I could hear the creek at the far edge of the property. "Stop the ceremony," I said. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. Cole's smile recalibrated. "I think maybe we have some." "I need to say something," Hannah said. She turned to face the guests, not Cole. Her voice shook on the first word and then steadied itself. 3 days ago, I went back to the venue to pick up an earring. I heard my fiancé and his brother talking in the back room. They were discussing how to have my mother declared legally incompetent so they could transfer her property out of her name before she understood what she'd signed. A sound went through the crowd like wind through tall grass. "His name isn't Cole Drummond," I said, and the meadow went quiet again. "His real name is Boyd Yarrow. He has an active warrant for wire fraud out of Harlan County, Kentucky. He has done this before, to 2 other families in Asheville and in Chattanooga, both of whom have now provided signed statements." I held my voice level. He targeted me specifically because my late husband gave environmental testimony in 2006 that led to a permit denial affecting his father's business. This was never about my daughter. She was the means. I was always the target. Cole's face changed. The warmth went out of it the way a lamp goes out, complete and immediate. "This is insane," he said, and his voice had dropped to something colder than charm. "She's been confused for months. I've been worried about her. You can ask anyone. I've been her physician for 9 years." My doctor had been sitting in the 3rd row. She rose with the measured calm of someone who has delivered hard news hundreds of times and knows exactly how to hold a room. "Mrs. Hartley has no cognitive decline. She has no memory problems. She managed a complex estate, raised this young woman, and practiced 31 years in legal support on her own sharp mind." She looked at Cole without blinking. "You came to my office 6 weeks ago, asking about lorazepam dosages and the legal standard for establishing incapacity in an elderly patient. I documented that visit. The records are in this envelope." Joan had already risen from her seat on the aisle. She walked to the center of the meadow holding a leather portfolio, unhurried, the way she always moves when she's completely prepared. "I'm Hannah's mother's estate attorney," she said. "I have here a certified background investigation confirming the identity of Boyd Yarrow, the active Kentucky warrant, statements from 2 prior families, lab results confirming lorazepam residue on a glass sampled from Mrs. Hartley's home 2 weeks ago, and video footage of the individual known as Cole Drummond adulterating that glass." She set the portfolio on the nearest chair. "We also have a sheriff," she said. Sheriff Patterson had been sitting near the back in a plain suit jacket, looking like any other guest. He rose and came up the aisle with 2 deputies behind him. Cole looked once and ran. He made it 5 steps before Earl, who had been standing behind the tent all morning, stepped into his path. Rhett tried the other direction and found a deputy there too. They were in handcuffs before most of the guests fully understood what they were watching. Cole was still talking as they walked him through the meadow, something about lawyers and slander and how everyone present would regret this. His voice carried across the September air and then faded as the patrol car door closed. The meadow was very quiet after that. Hannah and I sat on the porch steps long after everyone had gone. Still in our formal clothes, the wildflower arrangements along the fence slowly softening in the afternoon heat. She said, "I almost didn't tell you. I sat in a church parking lot for 3 hours, convincing myself I'd misheard." "You didn't miss Har," I said. "I know." She looked out across the back acreage. "Did you ever doubt yourself? At the beginning, before you called Joan?" "Every single day," I told her honestly. I was afraid of being the paranoid old woman who ruined her daughter's happiness over nothing more than a feeling. But you trusted it anyway. Your father used to say, if something keeps asking the same question in different clothes, it wants more than an answer. I looked at the tree line at the edge of our property. He was better at reading people than I was. I learned it from watching him for 37 years. 4 months later, Boyd Yarrow was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison on fraud and conspiracy charges. Rhett received 3 years. The two families who had come forward testified, and their accounts built out the pattern the prosecution needed. Hannah sat beside me in the courtroom for the sentencing, and when the judge read the verdict, she let out a breath so long and slow it seemed like something she'd been holding since September. She moved back to the house for a while, saw a therapist twice a week, a woman she liked, who helped her understand that loving someone who turns out to be constructed is not a personal failure. It's a wound. Wounds heal with time and honest tending. By January, she had started walking the back acreage again in the evenings. Some mornings, I'd look out the window and see her pass the fence line, just standing at the edge of the old-growth timber, looking at the ridge the way Howard used to. One afternoon, I walked out to join her. "How much is it actually worth?" she asked, looking at the land. "The property alone? More than your father ever told a living soul." I watched a hawk cross the ridge line, more than Cole Drummond realized, and he researched us quite thoroughly. She almost smiled at that. I told her then, the full picture. The estate, the trusts, the patents still earning royalties from Howard's 4 decades of careful work. Her face went very still while I talked. "Why didn't he ever tell me?" "He believed money changed people," I said. "Not always badly, but always. He wanted you to build your own life first, to know yourself completely before you knew what you stood to inherit." I paused. He thought it was the kindest thing he could do. I agreed with him. She was quiet a while. Then, he was right. If I'd known, I'd have spent every relationship watching for someone like Cole. I'd have never let myself trust anyone at all. We walked back through the meadow as the sun went behind the ridge, and the first stars came up over the eastern hills. The farmhouse lights came on automatically. Howard had wired them that way in 2003, one of 100 small things he'd built into this place, so that whoever lived here after him would be a little safer, a little less alone. I visit his grave every October, on the anniversary of the morning he didn't come back from the fence line. I bring wildflowers from the garden, because he always said the arranged ones looked like they were trying too hard. I sit on the grass and tell him what's happened over the year the way I used to talk to him at the kitchen table in the evenings, easy and without ceremony. This past October, I sat down and told him about Cole, about the cameras and the lab results and the meadow full of 110 stunned guests, about Hannah's note on the gas station receipt, about the two of us standing up at the same moment, without a signal, because we are the same person at the core and we both knew what needed doing. I told him I trusted my instincts the way he always said I should, even when they frightened me. That I called in help when I needed it and didn't wait until I was certain, because certainty comes after the damage is done and instinct, if you honor it, comes before. The wind moved through the oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. I took it for what I needed it to be. Think about how close the margin was, not in dollars, in years. The years I could have spent watching my daughter grieve the wrong man while a stranger quietly disassembled everything Howard spent 4 decades building. That is what we actually saved. Time. Each other. The things you cannot replace or recalculate once they're gone. If any part of this story sounds familiar, the questions that come too often, the charm that feels slightly rehearsed, the sudden urgent interest in your health or your finances, or what happens to your property after you're gone. Please don't wait for certainty before you act. Trust the thing that made you uncomfortable before you had words for it. Howard gave me that lesson over 37 years of watching him read people, and I am grateful every day that it had taken root by the time I needed it. Thanks for being here. If stories about the lengths a mother will go to protect her family speak to you, subscribe to Ruby Revenge. And if someone you love needs to hear this, share it. These things happen more often than people want to say out loud. The best we can do is say them anyway.